the country is fundamentally progressive on a host of issues. This is what I tell you all the time. And of course, the other side has one poll that they always refer to. When you ask people, are you conservative, liberal, moderate, more people answer conservative and less people answer liberal. In fact, moderate is winning these days, but conservative beats liberal by about a 2-to-1 margin. And of course, the conservatives go crazy over that poll. And they're like, victory, the country's conservative. No. You asked about these loaded words. You've done a 30-year propaganda campaign against the word liberal, and then you're surprised when somebody doesn't say they're liberal on a poll. But when you break it down issue by issue, on almost every single issue, the country will have a progressive answer. I've showed it to you in a million ways. Let me show you several more examples from today. For example, asking about the question of Iran. Now, first, this is interesting. And by the way, it's a Washington Post ABC News poll. It's interesting because they ask, hey, do you think Iran has nuclear weapons? And the answer to that is 84% believe that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear weapon. Now, that is actually factually incorrect. But you can hardly blame them because the mainstream media is constantly warmongering over Iran, showing ballistic missiles, talking about how they're developing nukes. It's not true. The U.S. intelligence and UN intelligence says that they are not, at this point, developing nuclear weapons. At most, there's a concern that at a later date they might think about developing nuclear weapons. And they might have the capacity maybe at a later date. So that number is wrong, but nonetheless, it gives you a sense of how the American people are thinking. Despite the fact that 84% believe that they are developing a nuclear weapon, a great majority have no interest in invading them anyway. Now, I'm going to get to more stunning numbers in a second, but first, look at this. 53% of the poll respondents say that they oppose bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, and only 41% supported bombing. So comfortable margin there, 53 to 41 saying don't do bombing. But keep in mind, the great majority of these people think, oh, they're getting nukes. And they still say, I don't want to bomb them. I remember before the Iraq War, 69% of Americans thought that Saddam Hussein was personally responsible for 9/11. And so a majority of the country wanted to invade Iraq. But when I saw those numbers, I was stunned that the number wasn't higher for the amount of people who wanted to invade Iraq. If I thought Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, I would have wanted to invade Iraq. But that was fundamental propaganda. That is not true at all. And in this case, the propaganda that Iran has nukes has worked, and we still don't want to bomb Iran. Okay, but it gets better. 81% of respondents support direct diplomacy talks between the United States and Iran to try to resolve the situation. So, huge majority says we think they're getting nukes. 81% still says we want diplomacy, we don't want bombing, okay? Next number, 64% think it's a better idea to see if economic sanctions against Iran work, even if that allows more time for its nuclear program to progress. And another huge number there, think about that. 84% say, oh yeah, they're getting nukes. 64% say, even if they're getting nukes, and even if the time delay helps them, I don't care, I would rather do sanctions. The positions shown here in this poll are so fundamentally progressive. They don't want to go to war, okay? This is way to the left of President Obama's positions. Yes, President Obama says, hey, let's do diplomacy work first, let's do sanctions first, but he is quick to point out, boy, I'll tell you, if that doesn't work for a second, if these negotiations that are starting this weekend, they don't work out, oh, I'm going to go to bombing. If you listen to this poll, they'd say, don't do that. No, diplomacy, sanctions, and then at the last minute, if you think they've developed nukes, still don't do the bombing. Because Americans are more progressive than their political leaders, even their so-called democratic leaders, okay? Now, when you get to a second issue here, it gets even starker. This is about climate change and carbon emissions. Now, look, there's a lot of reasons you'd want to avoid carbon emissions, but of course, one of them is climate change, et cetera. Pollution is another one. And so how do the American people feel about that? Well, they feel very strongly. 65% of Americans support imposing mandatory controls on carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gases. That's an overwhelming majority. Now, capping carbon dioxide, as in cap and trade, is roundly ridiculed by the Republicans. They just ran a whole campaign against it. And the Democrats almost never stand up for it. In fact, President Obama didn't push for it. The minute he ran into trouble earlier in his term, they proposed it in the House, it passed. They got to the Senate, there was a little bit of trouble from the Republicans and some Democrats. Boom, they ran for the hills. And who's made an argument for cap and trade in the last 2 years? Not any Democrat I know, maybe a couple of progressive guys in the House, and that's about it. So no one has been arguing in favor of it, and still 2/3 of Americans say, yeah, that's very interesting. I would like to cap carbon emissions, mandatory caps, because the country is fundamentally progressive. Do you know that 50% of Republicans said the same thing? Even the Republicans, even after all that propaganda and almost no defense, they still say cap carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. By the way, this is a Gallup poll, okay? This is not some left-leaning poll, et cetera. I'm going to get to Gallup's role in this in a second. Look, when you look at the other questions that were asked, look at this. Setting higher emissions and pollution standards for businesses and industry. Now, this is what Republicans argue against. Not for business and industry, it'll kill jobs. 70% of Americans say, yes, we should do that. Only 50, and Republicans, even a majority of them, 54% say, yes, make business do this. And spending more government money on developing solar and wind power, 69% in favor, majority of Republicans in favor. Spending government money to develop alternate sources of fuel for automobiles, another widely ridiculed and mocked idea by the Republicans, 66% of the country, full 2/3 say we should do it. Majority of Republicans say we should do it. God, how progressive is the American people, and how much more right-wing is Washington, D.C. than where Americans are. By the way, even strongly enforcing federal environmental regulations and setting higher auto emissions standards for automobiles, 64%, 62%, and close to 49, 47 for Republicans. So almost a majority of Republicans in that category as well. You know why? Because we don't want pollution. We don't want greenhouse gases. We don't want our kids suffering from climate change. The country is fundamentally progressive. Now, one last thing about this. Gallup, in describing this poll, they can't say what's obvious here, which is that the country agrees with the progressive position. Well, that would be unneutral. So what's their headline for this story? I love this. Americans endorse various energy environmental proposals. Because in one of the answers, they said, yes, they're also in favor of drilling. How's that various? I mean, sure, that's in the story, right? It's a defensible sentence within the story. How's that the headline? No, the headline is country overwhelmingly in favor of almost everything that has to do with green energy, funding it, making sure there's caps on carbon dioxide, caps on fuel emissions, etc. That's what's screaming from this poll. It's their own poll. But no, they got to be neutral, which means even if we have to twist what the facts are to present you a different story. It's not just the headline. Here's something else from the report. They say, quote, Republicans and Democrats show substantially differing levels of support. Now, again, that's defensible in that, yes, 2/3 of Democrats consistently or higher say we should do these, and only a majority of Republicans say it in most of the questions. Yes, that's different, but that's not the story. The story is, oh my God, most of the Republicans support it, and an overwhelming majority of the American people support it. I'm sorry, not 2/3, nearly over 80% for most on Democrats, right? And you get to 2/3 for overall Americans. So why are you trying to paint the story in a way where it's like, oh, well, it could be this and it could be that, and you know what, I guess Republicans differ on it. No, you tell me after all this propaganda by the Republican Party, a majority of Republicans still are in favor of this stuff, and that's not your headline? Your headline is, well, they're still not quite as much in favor as Democrats are. No, that's just an effort to try to cover the ass of the Republican Party because they believe that everything has to be stated neutral, even facts. If you got a fact that doesn't support your thesis, that the country is split or that the country is conservative, and that's what conventional wisdom is, then you twist the facts, even as you present them, to make it seem as if the country is neutral and not necessarily progressive. All right. Well, that's what we're here to straighten out, man.